Father, thank you ever so much for your kindness of letting us be here, for offering us the protection that you have given us. That in the middle of all this foolishness, that we, the true body of Christ, would have a calming and peace-giving effect on this nonsense. We realize that your judgment is being poured out. We ask in the middle of that judgment that you would grant mercy to those who are seeking it, and you would give answers to those who are fearful and confused. Thank you now for your word, for this study, for those who are here tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. You'll have your paperwork here shortly, but I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about the question, then I want somebody to answer the question. Now, all of us have come up on a variety of car wrecks and collisions of one sort or another over the years. And there's really nothing unusual about that. But how many times have you come up on a really bad car wreck where two cars just absolutely destroyed each other when one of them didn't show up?
Well, I remember the time. No. Say it, I know. Yeah. Come up on a car wreck.
Where two cars just absolutely destroyed each other, but one didn't show up. Well, the fact is you cannot come up on a car wreck where two cars destroy each other if one of them doesn't show up. One may be destroyed, but if the other one ain't there, ain't nothing going to happen to it. Now, the reason that I bring that up is we have two different models of creation. I mean, there are a lot of submodels with the paganism and all that silliness that's out there, but there are two principal models. You have creation and you have evolution. Both of them must be embraced by faith. One has the weight of science behind it, one has the weight of mythology behind it. Now, if I hold out my hand, I can hold out my hand all day long and I can wish for $100 to appear. The fact is, nothing's going to happen because I don't have the power to create. And yet with evolution, we are asked to believe that there was nothing. And then there was everything. So everything came from nothing, so everything then is nothing. That's just all it is. You have nothing, you get everything, so then nothing created everything, which is in fact nothing. It doesn't work. It can't work. It's physically impossible for something to occur until there is a cause that creates the effect. And that's what we're going to look at for a while. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, you're all familiar with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. We know this. This was probably one of the very first verses I ever memorized in my life. Now, I've told you before, I was an evolutionist. I was an evolutionist after I got saved, because I just didn't know any better until I just began to read this chapter. And before I was done that day, it wasn't that I had transitioned so much as I had come to a crisis of faith. Now, my crisis of faith was this. I had been taught evolution. I believed evolution. I didn't not believe there was a God, but I believed evolution because that's all I knew. This didn't agree with it. There wasn't any way to make this fit. And I tried. I sat there and worked and worked and worked, and it just will not fit. It cannot be made to fit. So if you're going to say, and some people do, and they leave themselves in a, as far as spiritually, it's almost a place of chaos if you say, I believe the Word of God, But I believe in an old earth and that everything came progressively and God used evolution to bring everything into being. The problem with that is, if that's the case, and it becomes very complex, if that then is the case, then God's a moron. I'm being very careful what I'm saying here. You can't get around that. The God of evolution is a moron. When evolution first came into existence, they dismissed the six-day creation and said, well, it took about 25,000 years for all this to evolve. And then they'd get together and they'd decide, well, that doesn't work, so we'll say it took 65,000 years for everything to evolve. And as time went on, it went from thousands and thousands of years to millions to billions of years. The fact is, it doesn't work, and they know it doesn't work. But, as I said before, if you say, I am a believer, and you look at this and say, this isn't an actual historical event, it's a poem, why is anything else in the Bible a historical event? If you dismiss the first 11 chapters of Genesis as a poem, as something that's not literal, how can you say at any point any of the Bible is anything other than just either Hebrew poetry or well thought out fabrications? There's no logical platform where you can sit and say, I cannot accept the first 11 chapters, but I do accept what the Bible says in the New Testament about Jesus. It doesn't work. Everything that you believe about Jesus as a believer is based on these first 11 chapters. There isn't a theological way where you can get around that and not be heretical. It does not exist. Now, I looked through a lot of translations today because when you read, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, in today's world, that phrase, formless and void, tends to create in the minds of those who read it, the implication is it was void because there was something there before that was made void. There was some kind of chaos that took place and destroyed something. This is actually taught in theological circles. They've got a variety of names for it. I'm not going to go into any of that. Genesis chapter 1 is in prose. It is actually in Hebrew constructed along the lines of poetry. It is, however, not poetry because it gives a detailed and concise, very, very deliberate breakdown of how the earth was created. And it does so in scientific terms. Not the way we use scientific terms today, but it's very much so. Now, we're not going to get into all that tonight. I'm basically kind of feeding you with some stuff here. Verse 2, in its most literal form says, the earth was unfinished and without final form. Now, so you can get a very clear picture of what I'm talking about. I brought a piece of clay. That piece of clay has no definitive form to it. It's not finished. There is no construction that has gone on here. There is no evidence of design. It's just a blob of clay. This phrase, without form and void, is actually a potter's term. This is what it's referring to. By the time you get to the end of Genesis, however, you have design and finished form. Now, I know this is silly, but you see the difference. This is the result of intelligent, deliberate design. This is a shapeless blob that has no direction, no design, no anything. This is what a potter starts out with. This is what a potter ends up with. Because there was cause and effect. And it was done so deliberately and intelligently to create, not this, because this is what exists without design, but this. As silly as that pizza face looks, you get my point. Now, so I want to make a very quick summary of chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1, as you read it, going all the way through it, down to verse 31, is the story of the totality of creation. Chapter 2 is the story, or rather the history, of the creation of man. It is specific to certain aspects of creation, but all of those aspects it's speaking of are for the preparation of the coming of man. There is a large body of scholars who believe that chapter 1 of Genesis was a historical retelling that Adam passed down. Now, if you notice and you read chapter 1 and then you read chapter 2, you read two different styles. Very quickly, you're getting two different styles. It's like there's two authors, because very probably there was. Adam gave us this account. Moses gave us chapter 2. Now, that doesn't set aside anything, because that would have been normal for that time. It would have been normal for Adam to pass on to his children this account, exactly as you read it. Now, we know that when the Torah was put together, that the scribe Ezra put it all together in the form that we have it today. The first 5 books, the priest Ezra codified it, I suppose is the right way to say that. But because of the difference in the structure, I don't think there's anything wrong with making the assumption that we're reading Adam's words in chapter 1, and then we pick up where God began the revelation to Moses in chapter 2. It's both a divine revelation, it's both without error, it's both historically and scientifically accurate. Now, in the beginning, think about this. What was this the beginning of? Aside from obvious creation, what was it the beginning of? Okay. What else? And? Okay. In the book of Isaiah, I believe it's chapter 42. It is chapter 42 in verse 5. It tells us that God stretched out space to accommodate creation. So somebody go to Isaiah 42 and read verse 5.
42:5. Thus saith God the Lord, He that created the heavens and stretched them out, He that spread forth the earth, and that which cometh out of it, He that giveth breath unto the people upon it, and spirit to them that walk therein.
Okay. Now, the original statement of in the beginning God created, okay, that was the creation of all matter. That took place in an instant. The forming of that matter was made complete over 6 solar days. Now, how exactly the earth set as opposed to all the rest of this matter, we don't know. Is the earth the center of the universe? I have no clue. It doesn't make any difference. It's not the center of the Milky Way galaxy. I don't know that there's any real reason to suppose it's the center of creation. It may be, but it doesn't make any difference. It was the first perfectly formed part of creation. It's not until day 4, when we get to day 4, that space and the planetary systems we're so used to seeing in all of the galaxies. And the last I heard, and this is dated, but astronomers believe that there's something like 10 to the 64th power. Somehow that works out to be 10 times 64 billion or trillion, billion, million, 100,000. something along that number. And they're not even sure that's correct. They know there's at least that many. Now, 10 to the 64 power is 10 with 64 zeros behind it. You get to the point where numbers just don't make, that you can't wrap your mind around them. It means that creation is so vast and so majestic and so wonderful that when we look at it, the limited thing we can see, we ought to be awed by it. Just standing there, looking at it, allowing yourself to be absorbed in the vastness of it, and know that, again, the prophet Isaiah says, God holds the whole of creation in the span of His hand. That's the distance between here and here on a human hand. That's about 9 inches. And understand, God transcends creation. He's not bound by it. He's not within it. He is completely above it and beyond it. But He has taken the time to put this all in order. Now, you got the paper that has 6 cubes on it. And what I would like for you to do with that particular paper this week, each day, starting tonight, you've got Exodus 20:11, Isaiah 42:5, Psalm 19:1 and 2, Colossians 1:16, Psalm 24:1 and 2, and Hebrews 11:3. What I would like for you to do is each day go to that verse, starting tonight, read that verse, meditate on just what that one single verse says, and write down what the Holy Spirit impresses you with. You got 6 days. It's just a real simple exercise. And when we get back together next week, I want to know what you found. Because once you go through all 6 of those, what you're going to find is that you have built up a foundation, and quite possibly you've discovered things you've never known before. And that is always wonderful. Now, in this first verse, it says, in the beginning God. That particular phrase in English is Elohim. Elohim speaks of the plurality or the Trinity of God. That particular phrase appears about 2,000 times in the Old Testament. In chapter 2, you start getting into Yahweh. In chapter 1, it's Elohim. In chapter 2, you start getting into the name Yahweh. Yahweh is the common name for God, found 6,000 plus times in the Old Testament. That was the name that Moses was given by God. When you go tell Pharaoh, I am that I am, that is Yahweh. Now, according to, and I don't want to say this to be mean, but according to Jewish superstition, it is a name too holy to be spoken. It is, when you read, a lot of times you'll see the 4 letters. And they won't put any vowel marks in there because it's considered too sacred to speak. The problem with that approach is everybody in the Torah, everybody in the Old Testament knew that name. They spoke that name. They prayed in that name. They prayed to Him using that name. It is the expectation of God for us to address Him accordingly as He's chosen to reveal Himself to us. It was meant to be a name of comfort. When David stood before the Philistine, he didn't say, I come in the name of the Lord. He said, I come in the name of Adonai Yahweh. Today you die. You have offended Him, and I am here, and I'm going to be His judgment against you. He spoke that name with confidence. We likewise should speak the name of Jesus with that same confidence. When we invoke that name, we're not just speaking the revealed name of God. We are speaking it as a position of being His child. We are the sons and daughters of the Creator. He is our elder brother. He is the apostle of our faith. He is our designer. Everyone sitting in this room is 1 out of 65 million chance. Now you think about that. You are a 1 out of 65 million possible genetic combinations that could have been you. So there was 65 million variations that you could have been, but this is who God chose to make you form as in the womb. That's not random. That's not happenstance. That's deliberate. And in that we can give God praise and glory. Now, if He's our designer and our creator, and He is, somebody please read John chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Yes, please.
John 1, 1 through 4.
Yes.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men.
Hebrews 11, verse 3. Okay. In both of those cases, Jesus is called the Word of God. And He is called God. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think when God was creating the protogenesis of each different species, He was having fun? Now, the creatures that we have today are the end result of the original protogenitive species that was their ancestor. Whatever it looked like, it has progressed into what it looks like today. Do you think He knew what was going to happen? I mean, you think about it, the original dog was a super wolf. Big, massive, I mean, the fossils of these things, they're seriously big animals, and you wouldn't want to run up on one under any circumstances except between you and cages. But think about the duck-billed platypus. It's almost like just at the end of creation, He looked around and He had a bunch of spare parts and He thought, I'm just going to put all this together and look what I come up with. Now think about that. It's got a duck bill. It has fangs like a snake. It has flippers. It has a beaver tail. There's no rhyme or reason to that. It's just a goofy looking creature, but it's a lot of fun to look at. Think about the giraffe. Here's a creature who just pretty much ignores whatever's on the ground except for water, and he browses out of the tops of trees. That's not an accident. There's absolutely no way that could have happened by a progression of animals that were trying to reach the next branch up. Look at the pattern on their body. That pattern is unique to the giraffe family. Everything about that animal screams, I had fun when I did this. And I want you to have that same fun with what I've given you. I want you to enjoy the joy I had when I made these creatures. And when you understand that it is His will that those creatures exist right now for His glory, for our pleasure, at times for our clothing, our food, whatever. You are 1 in 65 million who just happens to be here now at this point in history by the deliberate, willful design of God. Now, I've already talked about the name, but I want to have one more thing, and I'm going to run out of time. How many of you have heard that a day with God is 1,000 years? What if I told you that is not what the Bible says? Go to Psalm 90, verse 4. Whoever finds it first, go ahead and read it.
Psalm 94, verse 4.
Yes.
1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night.
Okay, now go to 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8.
But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day.
Does it say as one day?
But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day.
Okay. The important word in all this is as. Now I'm going to go on and read verse 9. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is longsuffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Both of those verses have to do with the will of God and His working within time. They're never to be taken as a literalism. He doesn't sit on the throne and say, okay, 1,000 years has passed, so let's move on to the next day of the week. That's not what He's talking about. He's talking about His patience with sinners, His patience with His own promises. I've not forgotten you. I made this promise. It doesn't matter if it was yesterday or it was 3,000 years ago. I made a promise. I will fulfill that promise. When you read that verse, you cannot take that verse and apply it back to Genesis and say, well, okay, maybe it wasn't millions of years, but how about each day being 1,000 years? It doesn't work. It wasn't meant to be seen that way. God is not slack concerning His promises. It is not His will that any should perish. He is patient with sinner and saint alike, because He is drawing the sinner to repentance and the saint to fulfillment. And I am in the midst of a place right now where I'm really trying to push God. God, I need you to do this now. And I literally can feel Him pushing back against me. It's not time. I've made you a promise. I will fulfill that promise in my time. I don't know whether you struggle with patience. I do. It just doesn't work very well for me because I see the world right here, you see, and He sees all of this. And I've known for a very long time how small-minded I am, because I lack the ability to see things from an eternal perspective. If you want to pray for me about a specific need, I need to be able to better grasp God's view of the world as opposed to my view of the world. That's why I can look confidently at what's going on and say, yes, God is in control. And because I know God is in control, I don't know what's going to come out of this. Good, bad, or indifferent. And I'm not expecting a lot of good for a while. But I know at the end of it, you and I, as believers, and those of you who are watching, will be able to look back at this. Whether it's not even until eternity gets here, we will be able to look back at it and say, God's will was the good will. And we praise God for His will. Let it be done. When you can get to the point where you can honestly say, when you are looking at a circumstance, that is very adverse to you, or it seems like it is, and you know that God's will is that you surrender yourself into that circumstance with absolutely no promise or guarantee that it's going to work out, at least initially, to where it is going to be perceived by you as good. When you can look at that with no hope for you, for any goodness that you can conceive, and you can say, God, I surrender myself, let your will be done. At that point, you will know the peace of God like you've never known it before. The struggle to get there can be very, very painful. It can be very frightening. It can be very daunting. But when you get to that point where you are willing to surrender everything you love, everything you have, and everything you know, because you're willing to trust God, your will be done, no matter what, I know from personal experience, you will have the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. Let's pray. Father, forgive my bumbling and my wanderings. Thank you very much for the concrete assurance you've given me that you are my Creator and my Redeemer, and that your word is true as it is written. And I don't have to look for poetry. I don't have to look for philosophy. I don't have to look beyond the pages. But what you say happened, happened. And in and out of that, I can be assured that what else you have said is also true and faithful. Watch over everyone who is watching us and listening to us, who has heard this. Grant that we come back together next week, safe, undaunted, and unharmed by this chaos that is going on in our country. And we have done so as a witness for Jesus. And we have trusted you no matter what has come at us. In Jesus' name, amen.